We're very grateful to our legislative panel this morning. Please welcome State Senator Eric Berthel of the 32nd District, State Representative Joe Polletta of the 68th District, and the Chamber's professional lobbyist, Armando Paolino III of Paolino Public Affairs Consulting. We thank you all for joining us today, and we'll be diving into our legislative discussion in just a moment. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Bill Palomba of Blasius Chevrolet Cadillac in Waterbury. Bill serves as chairman of public policy for the Waterbury Regional Chamber and as chairman of our public policy committee. So welcome, Bill.
Good morning. Thank you, Margaret. And very pleased to be here with our three distinguished guests, all three great friends and supporters of the Chamber. As most of you probably know, the goal of today's event really is to just make you aware of the priorities of our local legislators and to give you a sense of where our lobbyist is, what he's been working on to date as far as the legislative session goes. Hopefully you've all had a chance to take a look at our legislative agenda that has been updated for 2021. It is on the Chamber's website if you didn't get a chance to see it. But it has state policy objectives in 9 categories this year. And we've also included a section that is dedicated to issues that have been run about due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Our lobbyist, Armando, continues to keep a close eye on all this stuff up at the Capitol. And we just wanted to see if he can give us a kind of a quick recap on what he's seeing and what he's been working on up there. So Armando, if you would.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Always great to be here with this group. It's probably the most comfortable place to have a business legislative discussion in the state of Connecticut. If all districts were like this, the discussions would always have a better outcome in Hartford. So we're tracking about 130 bills right now on behalf of the Chamber. The highlights of what I'm really going to try and stick to, and I'm sure we'll hear about them from our legislators, as well as some priorities that they see from a perspective related to their district. So there's a number of bills that are out there that we've been tracking that are related to funding, labor costs related to unemployment compensation, workers' compensation. There's COVID liability issues. As much as this is a new and different kind of a occurrence, the pandemic, once every 100 years, if you will, there's a lot of people, especially within organized labor, that see this as a huge opportunity to push the envelope on a number of issues related to labor costs, and who's responsible for an employee in the workplace under almost any circumstance. Self-induced or not. So there's a lot of very wide-ranging debates going on within the committees. The committee process is full-blown right now. We're heading toward the end of this month, which is about when most committees will begin to wrap up their work. And then what we're going to see is a shift to more work on the floor of the House and Senate as they begin to be able to debate bills for final passage and eventually to head to the governor's office for signature on his desk. As we do that, that process for all the issues wraps up. What we're going to see next is, as we head toward the end of the session, which is June 9th, what we're going to see next is the Finance and Appropriations Committee kick into gear. And we're lucky enough this morning to have a member of the Finance Committee here to speak to us. But the Finance Committee and the Appropriations Committee are going to kick into gear, and their work will focusing on the budget and the revenues to match up to that. And I use that word loosely, match up. That's not always the goal, and it's not because of the two legislators we have here today, but it's not always the goal in the legislature, at least as far as some are concerned, to make things match up. The last thing I want to mention is that there's a bunch of bills and the Chamber's involved in trying to focus effort around this. But just as an example, I'll say that there's 2 bills, House Bill 6595 and Senate Bill 1002. Both these bills are mirror images of one another. And what they basically are proposing to do, among many things, is as people in their businesses hire people back to work, they would prescribe who you can hire, when you can hire them, what rate you're going to pay them, what unemployment compensation rate you should reimburse them for, and if there's a long-term illness or long-term effects of workers' compensation, how and when you should pay that. Not to mention that there's not going to be any discussion, at least as much as there's a number of people pushing for it. So far, there's been no real discussion, especially in the Labor Committee, to get an effort out onto the floor of the House or the Senate to address unemployment compensation. The trust fund, how are we going to pay for that? Should it be bonded by the state? Doesn't look like the feds are going to bail us out. Or should it be on the backs of small businesses as they're trying to hire people back and get jobs in the economy moving again? And then how the effects of COVID may affect the workforce and who pays for it in the long run. So those are kind of the big, broad issues from a business perspective. There's a number of other things that will come into more focus later that are related to taxes and appropriations. But I think that kind of sets the table, and there's a lot of red meat on the table for our legislators to talk about.
Okay. Thank you very much, Armando. Always doing a great job for the chamber, and we very much appreciate that. So we're going to get some introductory comments from our legislators, and then we're going to ask some pre-submitted questions, but we would encourage anybody on the forum here to submit questions through the chat function. I think everybody probably at this point in time knows how to do that. But at this time, I would like to ask the two legislators to briefly introduce themselves, maybe list some of their committee assignments, and discuss some of the issues they hope to address in the legislature this year. And we will begin with Senator Berthel.
Good morning. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Armando. Thank you, of course, to the chamber, Lynn and Julie and Terry and everyone else on the call for putting this together. I will say to you that I would much rather have preferred being back at the golf club or somewhere where we could have sat around a table and had a face-to-face 3D discussion. I do have my breakfast right over here. I'll eat it when Joe starts talking because I figured it is a breakfast meeting and I can chew and not offend anyone. It's always good to come before you. You know, as you know, Representative Polletta and I live in Watertown, so the Watertown Oakville Chamber is a little bit even more near and dear to us with respect to the work that it does, and to all of you as our constituents, whether it's business or whether or not you actually live in the district. In terms of Bill, what you asked me to provide as introductory comments. First of all, you know, obviously, Joe and I are very pleased to have been reelected this past November. It seems like that was a year ago already at this time. It's been a really fast period of time since November through now, and we're actually just about approaching the midpoint of this session, which is the long session. I think we've got maybe not quite the midpoint, about a third of the way through, but its time just seems to be rolling very fast for us. I think we have 11 weeks left before we will gavel out. But as a reminder, my committee assignments: I serve as the ranking member on the Education Committee. The Education Committee in the General Assembly is responsible for the oversight of government policy for grades K through 12. So not secondary, not post-secondary, not higher ed, not pre-education, preschool, but just K through 12, public K through 12. I also serve as the ranking member on the Human Services Committee. Human Services Committee is responsible for essentially the oversight and policy on how we spend money in some of our largest agencies and how we are administering services. So for example, the Department of Social Services, Department of Developmental Services. I would argue, Armando, you might correct me on this one at some point, or Joe, you might even correct me, but I would argue that this committee probably has more money that flows through it than just about any other, because all of our Husky program and Title 19 and things like that are governed through the Human Services Committee. I also serve as the ranking member on the Banks Committee. Banks is a smaller committee, but nonetheless has a very important role with regard to how we are protecting consumers and businesses, and making sure that we're not putting any undue or unfair mandates on either the industry or the consumer in terms of banking regulations. We have a very complicated banking system in Connecticut. If you're not aware, we obviously have banks, we have credit unions. Some of those are federally chartered, some of them are state chartered, and there's different rules and regulations that apply for depending on what type of organization it is and what type of charter they hold. And a lot of the discussion in the Banks Committee this year has been to try to get some parity and equality between the state charters versus the federal charters, and between credit unions and banks with regard to things like lending and foreclosure mitigation processes and things like that. And lastly, I'm very honored to be a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. As we all know, making sure that taking care of the men and women who have served our great nation, whether in peace or in wartime, is a priority for the legislature. It's arguably, I would say it's probably the best committee to serve on, only because it's truly nonpartisan. We come in and we don't approve. It's not like a rubber stamp for everything. We listen to every bill that comes before us. A lot of money can be spent there as well, but it's very hard to say no when something is really meaningful and important for our veterans. And lastly, rank has its privileges, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek and a little bit of sarcasm. I earned the more ceremonial title this year of Deputy Republican Senate Leader in our caucus. There are only 4 deputy leaders in the caucus, and I was honored to have been have that title bestowed upon me. I don't get a better parking space. I don't get. I think I might get a small stipend for that, but that's really probably the only real benefit for it. So again, I look forward to a really great conversation this morning. As I mentioned to Lynn and the chamber before we opened up the event, I may pop off for a moment right around 9 o'clock. I'm supposed to testify on a bill that I proposed before the Insurance and Real Estate Committee. If I do that, I'll be very quick and come back. But so if you see me leave for a minute, it's not because I'm not interested in hearing what you have to say. So thanks, Bill. Thank you for a few minutes to say hello and talk about my committee assignments.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, Representative Polletta, if you would give a brief opening comment.
Would love to. Thank you, Bill, and thank you to the chamber, of which I've had so much respect for over these last few years that I've served in the legislature. Of course, to Lynn and Julie, and all the work you do here trying to promote business during these tough economic times. Because the other day we were at a Senator Berthel and the chamber and I were at a ribbon cutting at a restaurant in Oakville, and I made a comment, and I think it rings true to everybody here, that it's nice to see a business opening in this economic climate and during these really tough times for a lot of people. And I think you can all agree on this call that, sending a $1,000 check or giving somebody a token to try to get them through a week or two might be a nice gesture, but in the end, it's going to be businesses that are going to get us out of the mess. It's not going to be the government. We've seen this, throughout our history. So I've noticed that our superintendent's on the call from the town of Watertown, as well as our Board of Ed chair, and it's great to see them here as well, participating, because they're a very integral part of our community. So this session has been very odd for me, at least, because I've done most of my work here from my office in town. And, there's a huge disconnect. Armando can probably tell you more about that, but the lobbyists actually do have a really big part in shaping public policy. And without them and without the face-to-face meetings, it's been just a really weird experience. But nonetheless, we're moving forward. Eric, highlighted some of his committees. Unfortunately, we don't share a committee. I think maybe next term we're going to ask for something together. But right now, I'm on housing, finance, and insurance. I'm the ranking member on housing, where we had a brief taste of that zoning bill, which I'll just tell you briefly is an awful bill. It basically lets housing authorities in cities pull permits in small towns and bypass zoning so they can build as much housing as they want. And as you know, they're subject to federal funds, so they can just come in and start building, fourplexes and maybe like 3-story buildings with 1-bedroom apartments. It would dramatically change the landscape of our town, but more importantly, increase services, because you need a bus line, you need probably another school, more police and fire, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe the water line can't handle where they're going to put the project. So that is a big hot button issue. They just had a 24-hour hearing on it in the Planning and Development Committee, and we are going to fight this thing tooth and nail. I am a firm believer that everyone should have a right to housing. Maybe not everyone agrees with me, but I do think that it's a great idea. But bypassing local zoning regulations is not the way to do it. We have a lot better ideas on our side of the aisle that we can discuss later on in the call. Also, you've heard about this gas tax. Gas prices are going up. While the governor, we appreciate he said no new taxes, and I hope he stands true to that. But he did sign a proclamation or something joining us in this multi-state compact that ultimately raised gas prices, and that's only going to continue with the Biden administration. So he killed the Keystone XL pipeline, which would have created more jobs and then also kept energy lower. So we have to make sure that we're looking for, because we're getting new residents in Connecticut, and we need to make sure that these people coming in from New York are going to stay here and invest here. And by raising the price of living or gasoline or whatever, we're not doing a good job at it. So that's kind of our job. And then also, finally, last but not least, is this pandemic relief money. Everyone is like, it's like a kid in a candy store, and the candy is the money. And like these people up in Hartford, and I say these people, and I'm sure Eric and Armando will agree with me, but these people, I'm meaning like the people on the money committees, they can't wait to get their hands on this federal money and distribute it. But this money needs to go to where it was intended, to small towns. Our town and education budget need help. We had a 0% increase last year in taxes in Watertown, which was great. We cut services. So, I think the town of Watertown deserves to get some chunk of that money. Of course, not 10 billion of it or whatever it is, but, we should be entitled to our fair share of that money. We cut services and, our kids have suffered because of it. Our town has suffered because of it. And then small businesses. So many of you on the call here have seen, one of your worst years ever. My dad's electrical business was down, 25 to 30%, and that's nothing compared to restaurants, banquet halls, and hospitality. They're down 90%. They should be able to tap into those funds, not people that, perhaps did better than others. You should have to show some sort of loss to tap into those funds. So we're going to make sure that that money, or at least try to make sure that that money is spent appropriately and that it's appropriated to the right pockets of people and municipalities that really need it. So with that, we'll take questions, or Bill, however you see fit, but thank you for this opportunity to speak. And it's always great to be here with all of you.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. Yeah, we're going to dive into the questions. I just wanted to remind everybody that there is the chat function there, and we do have some pre-submitted questions, but I would encourage you to submit those as we roll along. So I'm going to start with one that was submitted by one of our attendees, and I will read it word for word. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed a great deal of problems with high-speed internet. There are access and affordability issues that we have seen impact virtual visitation of loved ones in nursing home, access to telehealth, and remote work and learning. Governor Lamont proposed a bill, HB 6442, an act concerning equitable access to broadband to deal with high-speed internet. Can you tell us a little about it, what its prospects are this year, and if you support it? So I will throw that out to either representative or senator. Whoever wants to jump in on that one first.
So honestly, I have not actually read HB 6442, but I know that the issue becomes, well, let's take a step back. There has been some discussion with some of our internet providers in Connecticut, and some of them have stepped up to already make internet accessible. Maybe not their high-end, premier product, but to make access points available, and even to make some technology to use on those access points available. Again, not having seen the governor's 6442 itself in terms of what he's proposing, what I am always concerned about when we look at a mandate to do something like this is that we have businesses that are working allegedly in a free market, right, and are selling their services and looking to stay in business, to run a business, right, to be profitable, to stay above the red line. And I think when we look at mandates that come from Hartford to force companies to do this, we change that metric and we change that dynamic. And again, in complete honesty, having not looked at what the governor has proposed, if the governor's proposal said something like, let's talk to the internet providers and see if there's an opportunity for incentivizing them to help them to make more access points, I would be more favorable at looking at something like that as opposed to a mandate that might come from Hartford that says you are required, if you're providing, let's just look here in Watertown, if you're looking at Optimum Cablevision, which is essentially our main provider here in Watertown and in most of Oakville. If there's a mandate to Cablevision or Altice now to provide that service, then I would have difficulty supporting a straight up mandate. And I think that's true of anything that we look at on with our businesses. We've seen lots of mandates come out of Hartford in the 7 years that I've been up there related to, as Armando spoke to a moment ago, with labor issues in particular, things that we're not really looking at the complete picture. Businesses are the economic engine in Connecticut, and when we continue, and we're going to talk more about some other bills this morning, at least I'm going to highlight some of them if we don't have questions on them, that are actually very damaging to our business community, small and large, that will make things considerably more difficult and harder for those businesses to conduct business in Connecticut. But I think I've given Representative Polletta, because this is how we play, I've given him enough time to actually go and read 6442 while I'm talking. I could filibuster and go on and get the phone book out and read, start with A and go to Z. Joe, are you ready to talk about 6442?
This is the beauty of having Eric go first. I pulled the bill up on my phone and read it.
I'm being very honest. But I don't like mandates on businesses, is my takeaway from that. So go ahead.
I make him go first. I get on my phone, I read the bill, and then I act like I knew everything that was in the bill the whole time. Quite honestly, I have not read the bill. I'm not on, I did not sit in the hearing either, but it looks like what I'm reading is it's saying that the state shall provide something into the equivalent of 5G internet access throughout the entire state in major, municipal centers. So downtown Waterbury, Stamford, Hartford, New Haven, whatever. They will all have access to 5G and free. So I guess the question becomes here, it's a great idea because it says it's to promote businesses and get more businesses in our state. Awesome. Young people love the internet. But what's the cost? That's going to be the bottom line figure here, to bring 5G internet to every one of our 161 towns or whatever we have. So it's a great idea. I mean, this, compared to some of the bills that the governor and the Democrats have put forward, this is not the worst bill, but I just have an issue with the cost and to see what it's going to cost to bring it to, all of the major centers, municipal centers across the state. And then, what lines would you access? Would you have to, are we talking eminent domain to get the lines there? But I guess that's all going to evolve. But yeah, it's a good idea, I think, in general.
Okay. Yeah, the issue always boils down to what it's going to cost, Representative. You're right there. Armando, I'm not putting you on the spot, but on any of these questions, if you feel you have something you want to interject, please feel free to do so. So let me move on to another question, and this involves the minimum wage. As we know that legislation was passed that increases the minimum wage. There are several House bills advocating for the delay of increasing the wage for a year. Do you know what the current status of these bills are and perhaps what their chance of success might be?
So I can go first on this one. I had my fair share of multi-night debates on minimum wage last year in the House. So first of all, the Democrats in their majority in Hartford, have decided that $15 an hour is where we're at. The problem with the bill is there's this provision in it called the CPI, Consumer Price Index, which actually allows the minimum wage to increase above and beyond $15 an hour as the cost of living goes up. So could we see $20 an hour in Connecticut? Our cost of living is pretty high. We're one of the highest in the nation. So yes, the answer is yes. So it doesn't stop at 15. There's been many bills. I put in a bill for the FMLA program, which I'll talk about in a minute. You know, I think that we need to also halt that. That's a payroll tax. But there have been several bills to delay the implementation of the dollar increase, which will take effect again here in I think November or October. It'll go up again to 12. But it's fallen on deaf ears. The bill is signed. They passed it unanimously out of the House. I think, thank God for Joan Hartley, but I think almost every Democratic state senator besides Joan voted for it. And ultimately, the governor signed it. He did stretch it out. He had asked for 4 years. Originally, the original bill called for 2 years, which would have meant that by this year, we would have been at 15. I think ultimately we get to 15 by 2023. But the bigger underlying issue with this bill is the talking points that we've said the last couple times we've been here, and that's it's going to result in less hiring, more automation. The people that are already making 15 and 16 are now going to want 18 and 19 and 20. So wage compression is a big issue. And in a time when now, you know, we have a lot of kids looking for jobs, and I say kids, I mean, you know, summer jobs, part-time jobs. No one ever wanted their kid to get rich off being a camp counselor. We've always seen minimum wage as a starting point, but there's two different philosophies. There's some people that think minimum wage should be a way of life. You know, we don't want to stay at minimum wage our whole life. That's like where you start. And then once you prove yourself, you get bumped up to a manager, you get bumped up, whatever, general manager, you're in charge of 10, 15 people. Now you're making double what they're making because you've shown your worth. But there's some in Hartford that think that it needs to be what they call this living wage. The living wage is not $15 an hour in Connecticut. Everyone knows that the living wage is more like 23 or 24. And that's my fear. That's where we're headed with this, is we're trying to get more of a living wage than a minimum wage. And there's two different things. I don't support either, by the way. I don't support giving a minimum of a living wage, but that is what they're trying to couple these two things together and tell people, okay, you know, we're going to give you some sort of pay so that way you can live comfortably in Connecticut. And that's not the government's job to do that. So, of course, I opposed the bill. Senator Berthel opposed the bill, but we're in the minority, so it didn't go very far.
So I think that that Representative Polletta did a great job in summarizing our mutual position on this bill. There's a couple of things that I would add to that. First of all, I see that George Francis has joined us this morning. Good morning, Mr. Francis. Good to see you. You know, George and I have had many conversations about how minimum wage affects his business. And here's a guy who's been 3 generations, 100 and whatever years it is, of running the greatest amusement park in the United States, right here in the heart of the 32nd, right over the line in Middlebury, and has a little bit in Woodbury as well, which I discovered a number of years ago. The Lily Pond is actually in Woodbury. But my point in that is that you have a seasonal business that essentially brings in a couple of hundred or more young people to come to work. And George, just like anyone else who's running a seasonal business, whether it's a camp, whether it's an amusement park, whether it's whatever it is, seasonal type activity, is now forced to pay, as Joe spoke to, 16, 17-year-old kids a $13, I think it's $13 by the end of this summer, or whatever it is, $12, $13. Okay, Joe, I see Joe Riolo, who I went to high school with. You're running a business. I don't know if you have minimum wage employees in your shop, or if you hire young people for entry-level roles. But the reality of this, what it all comes down to, is that, as what Joe spoke to, sorry? Oh, I thought someone said something, sorry. What it all comes down to is this. Every time we put mandates on businesses, or we put taxes on, new taxes on things that we are buying or services that we're using, the end result is the cost of everything goes up in Connecticut. Okay, the cost goes up. And this is why, despite what the governor and our colleagues on the left will say about this housing boom that we're in right now, yes, we actually saw a huge uptick in the purchase of houses, particularly here in Litchfield County. But the reality was that these people were not coming to Connecticut because Connecticut all of a sudden turned into some nirvana and great place to live where, the milk and honey flows, as someone said to me. But instead, it was an escape from what arguably was something that was a lot worse than where they were living, coming out of New York City and really tightly populated areas that are west and south of us, and looking for some relief from that. So when you look at the cost of living in Connecticut compared to just about any other state, we're the worst. We're the worst. It's highest here than it is just about anywhere else. I think there's one state where it's higher, and the cost of labor clearly reflects in the cost of goods and services. When I'll go back to the example with Quasi, and George, I don't know how it affected or how it affects your gate price this year. I know we talked about that last year. You decided to not increase your gate price last year, despite the fact that you had thousands of dollars in increased payroll costs that were not something that you as a business owner decided to do, but something you were forced to do because the government said you had to. Okay? And that's just wrong. That's not the way things should work. And we continue to do that. And then add to that what Joe spoke to, an element of the minimum wage that a lot of people don't understand. Okay? And Joe did a great job explaining it. I'm just going to repeat it, is that wage compression. So if you have someone who is currently in a job and they're making, forget about minimum wage, let's say they're making $12, $14 an hour. And all of a sudden the minimum wage worker behind them is getting $1 increase because the government said so. Well, that person working at $15 or $16 an hour is now going to go back to you as the business owner or the manager or whoever and say, hey, Joe got $1 raise thanks to Ned Lamont. I want $1 raise thanks to you as my boss and the business owner. And then the person who is supervising all of those people who might not be, might not be an hourly wage earner, but is a salaried employee, is now going to come to the boss and say, hey, you're paying me X number of dollars a week for 40 hours. I want X plus a little bit more. Okay? And all of that drives up the cost of everything in Connecticut, everything. And that's just a really bad spot. Now, back to Joe's point real quickly, and we can move on. We have a problem in Connecticut because of this. So it's a catch-22. It's a double-edged sword. The more expensive things get, the more we need to have people earning higher wages, right? How do you afford to stay in Connecticut? How do you afford to live and survive in Connecticut? So it's kind of the cat chasing its tail. The more that we increase wages, the more the cost of things go up, the more we have to increase wages. And the most disingenuous argument, and don't listen to me, don't take me at face value on this. Go look at the research on this. When you get to a $15 minimum wage, the argument from people that support that is, well, look at that. If Eric Berthel started at $10 an hour back in 2019, and now in 2023, he's making $15 an hour, he's got $5 an hour more on a 40-hour work week, $200 more that he is now investing in the economy and he's spending. Well, yeah, sure. But I'm being forced to do that because now a gallon of milk isn't $4, it's $5. Now going to Quassapog isn't $30 to get in, maybe it's $45 to get in. And everything goes up. And if you look at studies that have been done in other states where they have had these this very fast run up for minimum wage, this is exactly what happens. And the person who's making $15 an hour in 2023 actually has less spending power than they did when they were making $10 an hour 4 years before. Don't take me at face value. We can find the studies and send that to you. But that's how it works. That's how it works. So, and again, I think everyone should be paid a fair wage, but it should be done. It should be done in concert with good consultation with businesses to see what can they really afford, what can they really do, how do we reduce the other mandates that are placed on businesses so they can help increase wages. And we don't do that. All we do is increase taxes, we increase mandates, and then we go and say, oh, on top of all that, you have to pay a higher wage.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Representative, for those comments. Let's move on to something that is currently evolving issue, and it's one that the Chamber Board is currently looking at as well. It's the public option in Connecticut, and this is the public healthcare option. How would implementing a public option for healthcare in our state affect our business owners? And will you be an advocate for or against this bill? And I recognize that the bill has kind of taken a couple different turns lately, but if you would comment on that, please.
Eric, you want to go?
Joe. Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, I'm on the insurance committee, so I can at least offer a little insight on this. So first of all, I do not support a public option. So Connecticut, and particularly Hartford, is what's called the insurance capital of the world. So by setting up our own insurance company, it's like we're going against our own businesses. It just doesn't make sense. The advocates for the bill say that it's going to drive costs down, but we know that anytime the government gets involved with healthcare, it ultimately results in higher taxes and more regulation, and it's just a bad idea. So there were a number of proposals that gutted this bill, and I couldn't believe it, but one of them actually passed the insurance committee last week, with Republicans and Democrats voting against the progressive wing of the Democrat Party to gut the bill a little bit. I was part of that. I am not a ranking member on the committee. I don't have any leadership on it, but they called a question. Basically what happened for Inside Baseball was they called a question to debate an amendment to the bill, which would have changed the bill for the better. And that passed. So then they called the vote immediately. And of course, you know, the chairman, who was a state senator, very liberal, it doesn't make him a bad guy, but, you know, he wanted the public option. He got all his people on the call, but he couldn't get enough. And there were Democrats and Republicans, I think by 1 or 2 votes, voted to change that bill dramatically for the better for small businesses and for the state of Connecticut. So right now, as it stands, it's a watered down version of a public option. I think that's good news, by the way. So no, I do not support it. And as the bill stands right now, I probably still would vote no on it, but it's a hell of a lot better than what it was.
Yeah, and Bill, I would echo that. I don't know that there's a whole lot more I could add. Joe is on the committee of cognizance for that bill. You know, I'll go back to, and I am going to sound a bit like a broken record. When we take the free market out of decision making for things like healthcare, it is only going to drive up the cost, and that's what we've heard from insurance providers. Hartford is still, I think, the insurance capital of the world, and I think we are potentially going to be doing a great disservice if we don't allow a little bit more of the free market to comment and be part of the ultimate decision making. I don't think there's anyone on this call that doesn't believe that healthcare is something that you should have a right to, and a human right. And we don't want, you know, we certainly have a problem across the nation, not necessarily as profound in Connecticut, but it's an issue that has to be addressed. But as Joe said, the bill in its current form is not something that I would support, just because of all of what we've talked about. It needs a lot of work, and it shouldn't be. I don't think it's something that should necessarily be played out solely in committee meetings and then on the floor of either chamber. It requires a much larger and extensive conversation to get it right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both.
If I may, Bill.
Yes, Armando.
I'll jump in here, and Eric's right, especially that last comment, that it's a discussion that should be had, and it should be a much wider debate on the floor of the House and the Senate. The Senate chair that Eric referred to on Monday this week, following that vote, in his caucus, called out the other 2 senators within the Democratic caucus that voted to not to have that bill be changed in their caucus on Monday night. This was following the committee meeting. So the leader, the chairman of the committee, the insurance committee, Matt Lesser, who's a nice enough guy, as Eric said, but he firmly and fervently believes in this, and he wanted to change the rules of the committee. He wanted to change the rules of the way the caucus works. He wants to change the rules of the way the legislature works, because he wants this so bad. They're willing, those that are invested in this issue will do anything to twist the rules and the procedures in order to get it passed. And that the frustration that they experienced, as Joe laid out in the insurance committee, is just making them work that much harder, because they're learning that it's a wide discussion, it's a broad discussion, and everyone has to be on board.
Okay, thank you, Armando, for that. Okay, again, I remind you, if you do have a question, to submit it through the chat function. We're kind of running up against it. We'll try to get through a couple more, but let me address an issue or ask about an issue. Wait a minute, we do have a question. So let me defer to one of our attendees. I heard about a bill that there is a proposed 1% personal property tax on business properties and owners of rental properties, as well as an increase in the mill rate. Is this true, or can you elaborate on this additional property tax?
Sure, I'll go first on this one, Joe. So I'll let you follow since I followed you. So there is a proposal for a 1% statewide, sorry, not 1%, a 1 mil statewide property tax that, as it is written right now, this is a bill from Senator Looney, who is the president pro tem of the Senate and one of the longest serving legislators in the building. Good guy from New Haven, but has some pretty strange ideas sometimes, and this would be one of them. The concept of this bill is to impose on personal homes valued over assessed at more than $300,000. By the way, that would be defined as a mansion in Connecticut. If your house is assessed at more than $300,000, you are, by Senator Looney's definition, living in a mansion. You probably can tell I'm not a fan of this bill, and I will say to you that there aren't many people who are fans of this bill. But as if that's not enough, since you now know that you live in a mansion, some of you, congratulations for your upgrade. In addition to that status, you would, under the proposal, you would be charged an additional 1 mil of tax on your home. That would be collected by your local tax authority. So for those of us living here in Watertown and Oakville, that would be the town of Watertown would be responsible for collecting this additional 1 mil on top of the 32 or 33. I forget what the mill rate here is in town, but the town would collect that, and they would very happily send that to Hartford. And then Hartford, under the proposal, would take that money and redistribute it to other places in Connecticut. So you would be paying a tax on your house, on your mansion, to go and help bail out essentially New Haven and Bridgeport and Hartford and other places where they just don't have enough money to run their towns and cities. In addition to that, if you have a small business, and I forget what the threshold is, maybe Joe or Armando knows, but this 1 mil tax would also be collected on commercial businesses. And the money would not stay here in town. It would not go to help pay for our wonderful public schools. It would not go to help pave roads. It would not go to help improve anything in our town. It would be sent away and spent elsewhere. And here's what happens. I have a constituent who's a realtor in Southbury. And what she said is that what we continue to do, and I'm not directly quoting her, but the essence of her comment was, and she was on the radio with one of our morning talk shows earlier this week or late last week. She said basically what this does is it continues to assault the most dedicated taxpayers in Connecticut. And that's, I guess, all of us, if we consider ourselves, I guess maybe we're middle class. I don't know, maybe some of us aren't, or we're higher or lower on that strata, whatever. But the tax goes and assaults the middle class who own these mansions now in Connecticut, these $300,000 mansions. Okay. And it forces people like us to ultimately have that really difficult conversation with our spouses, with our parents, with our children, with our loved ones, to say, at what point do we say enough and we leave Connecticut? And we've already seen millionaires leaving Connecticut. We know that. There's stories about that, verified, about the top 10 or 12 billionaires in Connecticut left and took with them hundreds of millions of dollars of tax revenue that they used to pay to the state of Connecticut. Well, when we decide to leave, I'm not paying hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. I had a conversation with Armando a couple of days ago. We were talking about Connecticut taxes. But when I take the share that I pay, my wife and I pay, and we make a decision to leave Connecticut, if there's another 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people like my wife and I, now you're talking about real money. Okay? And then what happens? The middle class gets completely eroded and disrespected under policies like this. And Senator Looney, while I think his intentions are genuine, he really wants to help out our big cities. They're in a tough spot. They really are. He really wants to help them. But he's not going to do it on my back and your back, because the reality is the state should be going in and doing what a bank would do to a business, or a bank would do to your house. They should be going in, foreclosing, taking the city into receivership and fixing it. Instead of just continuing to throw money, keep throwing money at a problem that just gets bigger the more money you throw at it. Why do we have to bail out the city of New Haven? It's just not the way we should be doing things. We should, as a government, be finding a way to say, hey, looking at that and saying, what's wrong in New Haven? Why do you have this problem? And of course, look, the proponents of a bill like this will come back and say, well, do you understand that New Haven has Yale University, and New Haven has the University of New Haven, and New Haven has the hospitals, and has all this land that they can't collect any property tax on. If you look at Hartford, for example, just the property in Hartford that is owned by Hartford Healthcare Corporation would result in $38 million in property taxes based on the assessed value of that land if the city of Hartford could collect it. Well, I think we gave the city of Hartford Armando, help me out. Do you remember how much?
$500 million.
$500 million in the last bailout. So the $38 million from Hartford Healthcare, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not 10% of what they needed as a bailout. Okay, so keep throwing more money at the same problem without fixing the problem, and we're never going to get anywhere. We're just going to be paying more taxes. So I will fight, and the bottom line is, I'll fight against this. Joe will fight against this. I think there is enough common sense in the building amongst Republicans and Democrats that this is not a good idea for Connecticut at large to go and impose a statewide property tax. Because what happens next is, next year, Senator Looney comes back and says, well, 1 mil generated X and it isn't quite enough. So here's a proposal to increase it now to 1.75 mils. And then the following year, it's at 2.5. And then 5 years from now, we're at 5 mils in additional taxes. So you're paying 33 mils here in Watertown today. So in 5 years, maybe you're paying 38 or 40. And the additional amount has resulted in no improvement to anything going on here in Watertown. It has not given our wonderful new superintendent any additional dollars to improve the quality of education, which we already do really well in Watertown as a former proud board member, right? It doesn't help her at all. It's not going to help her. This money doesn't come back to Watertown at all. Doesn't help us to fill all those potholes that are out there in as we drive around through a rough winter. So that's my commentary on that. I'm an absolute no. I think there's lots of no's in the building, but it's just crazy that this is where we're at in our level of thinking. Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Bill, if I have 1 minute, I'll do it in 1 minute.
Absolutely, Representative.
So first of all, the governor made a commitment, no new taxes. He said it out of his mouth. He said it at the forum for the Connecticut Business Day a couple days ago. And he said it over and over that he does not want to raise taxes. He does not intend on signing a budget that raises taxes. So let's hold him to his word. And if he follows through with it, then we'll give him credit where credit's due. I'm a big fan of giving credit where credit's due. I don't care what party you're in. Look at the city of Waterbury. I'm in Waterbury just as much as I'm in Watertown. Mayor O'Leary's done a great job in bringing new business in. He's cleaned up the city. He's probably the best mayor in the state of Connecticut. I can say that confidently. And why would we want to tax these businesses that are coming in? They're investing in our communities, and we're going to tell them right off the bat, you're going to pay 1 more mil. Just doesn't make sense. And then as far as residents go, while we haven't seen a huge influx of residential in the city and in the suburbs, we have in Fairfield County. The real estate market is pretty hot right now. And we have a lot of New Yorkers coming over. So the first order of business when they come over is for them to pay 1 mil extra. Just doesn't make sense. So I am opposed to that. And I think it's a redistribution of wealth, which goes against my principles and Eric's principles. And, you know, we're going to fight it tooth and nail. We're going to hold the governor to his word that he does not raise taxes.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. There was kind of a follow-up to that, and I'm not sure if it was responded to. And Sue, if I get this wrong, please correct me, but I think she's asking there be an initiative to tax folks that do move out of state to avoid paying this tax by staying 6 months and a day, but still owning property in Connecticut.
So a lot of folks are doing that, and a lot of the money that we would have in Connecticut for the services and things that Eric and Joe both talked about are not being available because they're escaping it. If they're finding loopholes, so sorry. Finding loopholes, and I'm just wondering, I heard that there will be, or they're considering some kind of tax for this, you know, kind of stop, because they still are spending a lot of time in Connecticut. They still have homes, they still use services, and I'm just wondering if they're still talking about that.
If I understand you correctly, are you asking if the people that spend 6 months and a day out of Connecticut will still incur the cost?
Yes, for their on their retirement,
Oh, on retirement. Okay, so we were talking about 1 mil property tax increase, because if they were out of Connecticut for 6 months and a day, they wouldn't even be Connecticut residents, which we're seeing more and more. People spend, you know, 7 months in Florida and then they don't have to pay. Well, they might have to pay property taxes here, but income tax wise, they're not paying it because they're down there in terms of their pension. There is a plan to phase out the taxes on pensions, but I think that was halted, or correct me if I'm wrong, Eric or Armando. They were supposed to sunset that, or excuse me, they were supposed to continue it over a 4 or 5 year period. And then ultimately there would not be a tax on pensions, but they halted it, or it hasn't gotten to where they wanted to as quickly as they wanted. So yes, they're still taxing pensions, but if you spend 6 months and a day out of Connecticut, you are subject to the tax of the state that you're in. I'm assuming. I'm not 100% sure though, but I don't believe
I think
if you're not a
right.
Connecticut resident, you save quite a bit of money.
Right,
Yeah,
but that's
you're
what
not
do
go ahead, I'm
with
sorry,
one
Sue.
of the residents.
Yeah, you're not a resident at that point. You would have, and you would establish residency outside of Connecticut, become a Florida resident or whatever other state it is. We're using Florida as the example. Property tax is collected regardless of where you're a state resident. If the property is collected on the tax is collected on the property in the state that it's in. So this would not be the property tax issue that we're discussing would not be exempted because if you were an out-of-state resident. But I'm not sure in terms of just not to go off track. I'm not sure where we stood, what's in the governor's budget if he hit the pause button on the reduction of the state income tax on pensions and retirement accounts. I know that there was a plan to eliminate that altogether, which was received very favorably because it would keep retirees in Connecticut, which we want because they're active participants in the economy as well. You know, we look at all sides of it. If you're living here in Connecticut and you're retired, you're spending some of your retirement here in Connecticut as well on services and shopping and what have you. So, but I don't know what the status of that was. I don't actually know if I heard that there was a pause on that, just because it's a very volatile issue and you know, and it really it forces people out, and really it forces seniors out because they can't afford to stay here.
Yeah, which
when you pile on everything else,
which is why I brought it up.
Thanks, Sue.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, thank you for that. We got about a minute. I'm going to try to squeeze one more question in if I can. We haven't heard much about this in the recent past, but I think it's still lurking out there in the minds of many people. Are Connecticut residents still looking at the possibility of tolls or a mileage tax in the future? And where do you stand on these issues? and we just have a couple minutes left.
Just say no to tolls. I think the governor has said he will not support any legislation for what we see and what we understand to be traditional tolling, which would be gantries, electronic, Easy Pass, Sun Pass, whatever you call it. Sun Pass is Florida. Can you see I've got a little Florida on the brain today? But at any rate, the governor has said he will not support any outright tolling with electronic gantries. At one point in time, distant past, we had a plan to put 72, 85 of these radar arrays above all the roads in Connecticut, which would have made the cost, for example, of Joe and I traveling from Watertown to Hartford and back something like $7 or $8 in tolls every time we would go, which is just absurd. But what the governor has talked about is this mileage tax on trucks. And then you need not look any further in our community for a good example of why this would be so bad than to talk to someone like Bob Laban, who owns Bob Laban Jr., who's now president of Laban's Markets. And he'll tell you that that cost, whatever it may be, whatever it ultimately looks like, would be passed on to him on an invoice. So he gets a truckload of lettuce delivered today. The lettuce might be his cost $1 a head, and there's 1,000 heads of lettuce on there. He gets a bill for $1,000, and then there's going to be a transportation fee or a tax that's going to be added. And let's say that tax is $100, and that might be obsessive, but who knows? Could be, right? Assuredly, Laban Supermarkets is not going to lose $100 in the cost of selling you a head of lettuce. They're going to pass that on to you as the consumer, and that's one item. Supermarket has 15, 17,000 unique items that it sells. Why would any supermarket, why would any merchant who's selling anything that's delivered by a truck, which by the way is everything in Connecticut is delivered by truck. Everything comes on a truck to the retail space. Or if you're buying on Amazon and not shopping a brick and mortar, you're buying virtually, that all arrives on a truck too. And that truck is going to be taxed as well. That little blue Prime van that shows up in my driveway every day, because my mother is an Amazonaholic, I call it, right? That truck is going to pay a tax as well. And all of that cost is going to be passed on and goes to exactly what we started with. And that is an increased cost in everything in Connecticut. So instead of looking at trying to generate more revenue, we have to get back to the systemic start of this and say, why is it so broken and why does it cost so much? And let's figure out ways to reduce what we spend in Connecticut as a government, instead of always trying to find a new way to dip our hand into your pocket, your purse, and your wallet. So I'm against any and by the way, and then the argument is, well, the trucks beat up our roads, and what are you going to do? You're just going to let the bridges fall down? Remember Mianus River? Well, yeah, you're right. We did have a tragedy many decades ago. But if you look at what we receive in Connecticut from the federal government, because we don't have tolls, $1 billion a year in income, in revenue from the federal government to take care of our roads, and we don't spend any of it. We divert it. I think the word is intercept. We intercept it before it gets into the Special Transportation Fund. That's the question that we ask, that Joe and I ask, is why are we doing that? Okay? And why do we need tolls when we get almost $1 billion a year in help from the federal government because we don't have tolls on our roads? That was more than a minute, sorry.
Well said. Joe, did you want to add anything to that?
Just that, thank you, everybody, because I'll just wrap up my remarks now. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning and, express our interest and frustration with some of the policy that's going on. I know we all share that frustration, but I'd love to do this, and I'm always ears if you want to have an in-person meeting soon once we get this pandemic behind us. I'd love to do something in person. I'm sure Eric would love to partake in that as well. As far as this mileage tax goes that Eric talked about, that's a very real possibility, because the fact of the matter is that we all agree that something needs to be done with our roads, but there's two philosophies on how to get there. One is the Republican plan, which mainly calls for some borrowing and cutting of spending and pork in the budget, and then the Democrat plan, which ultimately calls for raising revenue. So there's two different roads, no pun intended, you could take. Our road, I think, is the better one, but we shall see. On an unrelated issue, there's a bill in the legislature that I co-sponsored with new state rep out of Waterbury, a friend of mine, Mike DiGiovancarlo, who put a bill in for the accurate tracking and fining for people that have license plates, out-of-state plates, that live in our towns that are not paying taxes to our towns. It's a great bill. It's a bill that is probably something that would have been introduced on our side of the aisle, but he has been addressing the issue for a while in Waterbury, and we talked, and I felt, you know, it was his bill, and he put it in, and it's moved forward. It's going to get out of committee. It's in the transportation committee, but it's going to provide some relief to these small towns, because all these New Yorkers and others that are coming in will have to register their car within 30 days or face a $1,000 fine. And I'm a firm believer in fairness. And if we're going to talk about people paying to use our roads, then if you moved here, you should pay to use our roads. And one of the ways you can pay is by paying your property taxes to your municipality. So if you know people that live here that have moved in, Bill, you live in Mount Fair Farm. I know there's a lot of New York plates up there. My sister lives in the area. It's not fair. It's not fair. We're paying the bills. We're footing the bills. And that's money that could be used for education. It could be used for infrastructure. And they're not paying it. They're paying it to another state. So I hope that bill moves forward. That'll provide a little, not enough to fix our highways, but a little chunk to our municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, I think we have to wrap this up. We've kind of run out of time, but I did want to thank both Representative Polletta and Senator Berthel very much. We always enjoy this. It's a nice, relaxed conversation. We appreciate your input, appreciate your efforts up in Hartford. I also like to thank Armando Paolino for his support of the chamber up in Hartford as well, and for Margaret for opening us up. And now I'd like to turn it over to wrap this up with Julie Page, Watertown Oakville Chambers Director. And Julie, you're on.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for being our moderator. I know it's not always an easy job, so we appreciate that. And
Easy for this crew.
thanks again to everyone for joining us, and of course to our legislators and Armando. We appreciate your time and your expertise, and we know how important it is to have open lines of communication between our business owners, our residents, and our legislators, so that everything really, we move forward with policies that make sense for everybody. So we thank you all so much. We encourage everyone to reach out to the chamber if there's any way we can assist you when it comes to public policy issues. And I just wanted to note to everyone that, you know, the town of Watertown has such a big focus on our community. We're really proud to be a part of that. And every year we work to provide scholarships to 2 seniors graduating from Watertown High School. We were really happy to be able to provide those scholarships in 2020, despite the pandemic when many families were struggling financially. And we are excited that we will be able to distribute these scholarships again this year, thanks to the generosity of our members. And our scholarship committee, just for anyone who isn't aware, selects one recipient who's pursuing a career in business, and then another recipient who is pursuing a career in STEM or the trades or manufacturing, because we want to try to support the future workforce of both our local businesses and our manufacturers and tradesmen, because manufacturing is such a large component of what we do in the state of Connecticut and in our Watertown community. So if anyone wants more information on the scholarship program or is interested in supporting that fund, you can go to watertownoakvillechamber.com. There's lots of information about our upcoming events and programs. Next week, we're having a webinar with the Connecticut Paid Leave Authority. I know a lot of business owners have questions about that new paid leave policy. So if you go to our website and you're interested in signing on to that webinar, we expect to have lots of questions that we're able to answer. And once again, you know, just thanks for everyone for joining us today. And we hope that you have a great day, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
You as well.